Welcome to DevNetwork's Developer Week webinar series. I'm Patrick Gallagher, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this week's featured webinar presented by Sysdig, a new sponsor of DevNetwork events and webinars. Sysdig is converging security and compliance with their Secure DevOps Platform, where you can embed security, maximize availability, and validate compliance, transforming your DevOps workflow into a secure workflow operating in a Red Hat OpenShift environment. Before we get started with speaker introductions, I have a few housekeeping items. First of all, I'd like to remind our attendees that live chat and Q&A is available during this 30-minute session, and you can raise your hand in chat and ask questions in Q&A section of the webinar viewer. Questions will be answered throughout the session in the Q&A section. Second, there are handouts available in the handouts section of your web viewer. Handouts can be found in the right-hand side in the same area as chat and Q&A. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and made available to you 24 to 48 hours for additional viewing. And you can take that link and you can forward on to your coworkers as you see fit. So check it out. So joining us today are Eric Carter, Director of Product Marketing at Sysdig, and Dave Meurer, Principal Solutions Architect at Red Hat Security ISV. So without further delay, please give your undivided attention to Eric and Dave.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for attending this virtual 2020 Security Symposium. My name is Dave Meurer, and I'm the Global Partner Solution Architect at Red Hat for our security ISVs. Eric?
And I'm Eric Carter. I am with the product marketing team at Sysdig.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. In this 30-minute session, we'll be discussing DevOps security, monitoring, and compliance. And before I hand it over to Eric, I just want to take 5 minutes to discuss Red Hat's Secure by Design platform. So I specifically wanted to dive into Red Hat OpenShift, which, as you can see here, provides a bunch of added services. In addition to that layer there, it's a CNCF certified Kubernetes deployment. It is important to note that OpenShift is Kubernetes. All of your kubectl commands will work just fine in OpenShift. And if you want an enterprise version of Kubernetes out of the box, you'll want some of these features that I'm going to go through here in the next few slides. All of these features were designed with security in mind. So starting with the container host, which of course is Red Hat Enterprise Linux and CoreOS, you're going to want an operating system that can secure containers at the boundaries, basically helping you to protect the host from container escapes. And the 4 red pillars that you see in the diagram are the foundational features available to secure containers within OpenShift. So it's SE Linux, namespaces, secure computing mode, and control groups. Now, I don't have time to go into the details of these security features, but I would highly recommend you checking out one of Dan Walsh's webinars or the session he presented yesterday at the symposium. You may see slides like this one where it describes some good examples of how SE Linux mitigated quite a few container runtime attacks. And it's basically done by enforcing a labeling system that provides mandatory access controls on every process and operating system objects. And so, of course, SE Linux is on by default in OpenShift's operating systems. And speaking of container operating systems, I wanted to mention why CoreOS is such a great choice. So if you wanted a container operating system to be secure, then ideally you want it to be minimal, immutable, and always up to date. And that's exactly what CoreOS is. It's an immutable operating system that's booted from container images, and it contains only what is necessary to run OpenShift. The next thing you'd want to take a look at is a lightweight, stable, and simple container runtime engine, which is what you get with CRI-O. So in OpenShift 4, CRI-O replaced the Docker engine as the default, and it shrinks the attack surface since you don't have one of those big fat daemons, because it's really only focused on what it needs to do to manage running containers. So for example, it doesn't care about building, signing, or pushing images to registries. Now, if you want to learn more about how to manage CoreOS and CRI-O, I point you to the machine config operator. Just Google MCO and OpenShift and you'll find plenty of resources. So now that you have an optimized container operating system and a runtime environment, the question you may need to ask is, how do I further harden my cluster and meet certain compliance requirements like PCI? Well, you can see here, Red Hat has a handful of guides online that can help. Now, when I hand it over to Eric in a minute, he'll go through Sysdig's features that can check compliance, show it in dashboards, and provide trending data as well. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention two more additional services that you get with OpenShift. And the first is cluster logging. As an OpenShift cluster log admin, you can deploy cluster logging to aggregate all the logs from your cluster, like system and app logs, either by using the CLI or OpenShift's operator hub. You can easily deploy a full Elasticsearch, FluentD, and Kibana logging stack through a couple operators. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is cluster monitoring. This is installed and configured by default in OpenShift. It's based on Prometheus and Grafana and monitors things like etcd, the image registry, and many other Kubernetes objects. So that's it for me. At this point, I'll hand it over to Eric to talk about Sysdig and how it extends and enhances the Red Hat OpenShift container platform. Eric?
Excellent. Great setup, Dave. I appreciate you doing that. And yeah, we want to look at what it is that Sysdig does and how it extends these topics, right? Security, compliance, monitoring for OpenShift. It seems like our joint customers are all trying to do a few things. One is to ship cloud applications faster. They're trying to also make sure that those cloud apps perform, that they're able to meet availability SLAs. At the same time, many of those organizations have compliance mandates. Things like you were mentioning are there to help them with those. And then just in general, and part of kind of why we're here today, in general, to manage cloud security risk. So we'll look a little bit today about how Sysdig fits into that picture. As we get started, the one acknowledgement that we want to make is that for the DevOps professional, and that, you could be a platform operator, traditional DevOps, IT ops, whatever your title might be, I think you'll agree with the sentiment of this particular slide. And that is that while much of our day was spent previously thinking about things like availability and performance and doing things like troubleshooting exercises and, of course, capacity management and so on. Many of us in these roles are being asked to take care of the things now that are on the right-hand side. So thinking about security and compliance, right? So the ability to do things like shift security left, scanning for vulnerabilities, understanding what it takes to secure containers in production, auditing, and then doing things like forensics exercises at the end of the day. The point here is that the bottom line for many of you watching is that you have a lot more responsibility. And one of our goals at Sysdig is to help you kind of get your arms around that and make it a much easier proposition. When we look at the different aspects of sort of this cloud native lifecycle, and thinking about it in the context of OpenShift, when we're building our applications, we want to make sure that we're kind of doing our security best practices even at the start, right? So when we think about embedding security, that is the idea that we want to do image scanning and validate configurations up front before we push into production. Once we're in production, we certainly want to also try to understand the activities that are happening in and around that might put us at risk. And these are the concepts of kind of doing runtime security and vulnerability reporting. And of course, it's not a perfect world. Things will happen. And when things happen, you want to be able to have a tool set that helps you respond and understand the what, the why, the how, and to be able to audit those things and to prove compliance. And of course, along the way, you want to be able to monitor performance and health. You want to understand how your applications are doing to be able to troubleshoot those, but then spread the goodness of understanding, am I compliant from day zero all the way through the life cycle? And that's the kind of picture and the kind of these are the kind of areas that for the OpenShift user that Sysdig comes into play. And we'll look in detail at some of these aspects in the time that we have together. All of this is available as a part of our solutions at Sysdig, what we call the Secure DevOps Platform. Sysdig Monitor, Sysdig Secure, there's sort of two pieces of that puzzle. And again, bringing those things together for the DevOps professional that now has much more responsibility. Our goal is to converge those concepts of visibility and security and to help you understand what's happening day in and day out, and then to help accelerate your application deployment because you have much better insight on what's happening with the code that you've produced and that you've started out on the OpenShift platform. And so that's essentially what Sysdig brings to the table. And let's take a look at some deeper capabilities of the platform. So when we think about that early phase of our life cycle, the build phase, you do want to be able to identify and block vulnerabilities. And this is important because you want to be able to scan those containers and know what it is I need to fix if there's something that's a known vulnerability. You can certainly do this today with tools like Claire, that's a part of the Quay registry solution from the Red Hat folks. Sysdig essentially will extend that with some additional capabilities, looking at additional aspects of your images, things like secrets and passwords, and going beyond just the OS vulnerabilities, and even being able to do things like scanning inside of a pipeline. So if you're using something like Jenkins, or if you go out on our blog just from last week, one of our folks in the tech marketing team wrote a blog about using Sysdig Secure with Tecton and those pipelines. And right, so the idea here is that you can understand, even if I'm a developer, I can understand what vulnerabilities have been spotted without even having to jump to a different tool. So being able to do that up front is a best practice. And I think most of you are undertaking that today, which is good news, right? That's helping protect you from day zero. The other thing that you'll want to do when thinking about compliance is to be able to run things like the CIS benchmarks. You've heard of KubeBench, Docker Bench. What we've done at Sysdig is automate those benchmark checks so that throughout your monitored clusters and clouds, you can actually have that kind of giving you a readout of, kind of green, yellow, red. How am I doing against all of the different sections of the CIS benchmark? And this way I can kind of measure my progress. I can report on those environment issues. And one of the cool things here is that we've used the information provided by CIS, the Center for Internet Security, and actually giving you sort of tool tips. So when you're not passing one of these sections, what do you need to do to button down that particular issue and take remediation steps? And then one of the benefits of having not just the ability to detect and report this to you is to give you a dashboard over in Sysdig Monitor that helps show your trending over time. So these are things like, how have I done if I consider maybe from last month to this month? What are the top things that I'm passing and what are the top things that I'm failing? So I can get my arms around that, because more and more you want to make sure that you're following these CIS benchmarks to make sure that you're secure. Now, when we think about our running containers, one of the tricky parts here is how do I see sort of inside the containers? How do I understand the potential threats that may be coming at me in a production environment? Because image scanning isn't going to help me with that. That's done earlier in the process. And other kind of tools that can't actually see different types of behavior are going to not really help in this particular instance. And so Sysdig's runtime security capabilities, which actually are built on top of open source Falco, which is a project that we started, is now part of the CNCF. Those are rules, policies that help you kind of turn on and off different things to look for the behavior in your environment that you can't allow in your business. We've built on top of that the ability to take remediation actions, and then further to do things like create forensics captures and record activity in that way. So this is an important part of the story. And why it's important is because I think it's one of those areas that is not being managed, at least not from day one. So folks are getting into the platform and they're kind of kicking off these projects, and it's sort of at a later phase that they start to think about this. What we encourage you to do is think about it a little bit earlier in the process, and this will help you, especially as you start to roll more and more applications out into production. And just to give you some examples of the policies that are available to you out of the box, the word crypto mining shows up there on the top left. Look, I mean, none of us want that happening. But then the other kind of things that you'll want to look for: suspicious container activity, potentially launching privileged containers when that shouldn't be allowed, suspicious network activity, unexpected processes. You've rolled a container that's running MySQL and suddenly it's starting a process that has nothing to do with that. We can spot that for you. You can ask for that container to be shut down, create a capture, and go back in and dig through that and understand the what. So that's all about the runtime from a security perspective. What you can also do is go in and on any particular what we would call policy event is actually look at an activity audit. So think about the ability to filter through things like what was happening from a file I/O perspective, what was being touched, maybe potentially uploaded, downloaded, what was happening on the network, what kind of commands were being issued in that environment at that time. Could be perfectly legit from an administrator, could be actually a bad actor, and you can actually go back and sort of reconstruct and replay that, including kubectl activity. So you can see if someone kube-exec and the kind of commands that they're running. So it's a very important tool set, especially for those of you who need to turn around and help the business understand, yes, we have our arms around what's happening in the environment. We comply with all the different regulations and rule sets. And so these are important things to consider for OpenShift if you're subject to a lot of these requirements. And I think most of us are in some way, shape, or form. So activity audit is a very powerful way to actually achieve that with containers. Now, as I said earlier, the tasks of monitoring security and monitoring performance go hand in hand. Dave talked about how Prometheus is now built in to the OpenShift platform. So you're actually able to monitor the control plane and understand what's happening. One of the things that Sysdig can help you with, especially this is important as you're expanding your environments, potentially multiple clusters, multiple clouds that you're running on, we can help you extend that Prometheus monitoring. We actually love that as well as an open source project. We try to embrace and extend that. And let's take a look at that for a second. So thinking about scale. So one of the challenges you might face is, how do I scale my back end where I'm actually collecting and interacting with all of these metrics that I'm collecting across the environment? How do I do that in a way that can scale much larger without having to get too complicated on the infrastructure, right? How can I do that by ingest more metrics and keep data for a longer time? Some of the teams we work with, they kind of want to take a look back and what was happening, let's say 6 months ago versus what's happening now, and let's see if we can learn something from the differences. And that's one of the things that Sysdig will help you do, is to retain that data long term and have that comparison look, as well as to troubleshoot effectively in real time. Now, the other thing is we've worked really, really hard to not sort of disrupt your experience. And what I mean by that is, if you're a Prometheus user, you've built Grafana dashboards, you've done things like work with PromQL to do your own kind of custom crunching of metrics, all of that's compatible with Sysdig. And we've worked, again, very hard to do that. We had a big release a few weeks ago that's centered around this. And we want to be able to help you maintain your existing workflows, all the stuff you've built around the OpenShift platform, as well as your applications, if you've instrumented for metrics, and then extend that above and beyond with some scale. And one of the cool things here is that from a perspective of kind of getting out of the business of having to manage monitoring on a back end, we really simplify that at scale. We have a SaaS solution. We also do on-prem, but there's sort of nothing easier really than that SaaS solution where you deploy an agent and you're up and running, not just with Prometheus metrics, but other things like StatsD and JMX metrics, as well as Kube State metrics, a lot of the things that you've come to rely on to really understand what's going on in your environment. So it's all about it making you more efficient. And it's about adding some capabilities that just aren't there with sort of out of the box Prometheus, things like role-based access control, single sign-on. And one of the unique things about Sysdig is teams. So I can actually, with a single backend, say, okay, you are the MongoDB team, and I'm going to give you direct access to monitor that, and that's all you need to see. So that's all you'll see. Whereas I might have another administrator, let's say that Dave is my Uber administrator, he can see everything, and then I can sort of meet it out like that, whether it's by physical host, whether it's by things like namespace or project in OpenShift, all of that becomes possible. So a good set of enterprise class controls, I suppose, is what I would call that. So our goal there is to help give you more insight into the environment. So in just the last few minutes here, let's do this. These are my quick Grafana, Sysdig, and PromQL screenshots. Forgot about those, but there they are. You can kind of see how the interplay together with Sysdig. What I wanted to do was look at the use case of using security and monitoring together and kind of help you understand where and how this could be of value. So let's just say that I've got some reported slowdown in service performance as coming from an end user, someone in the company, and you might say, okay, well, what is the problem that I'm facing? Well, what's important is to be able to understand, maybe that's from a monitoring perspective. I can go in and see, yeah, there's a CPU spike, something's going on, there's a lot more file IO happening. I got an alert that triggered and sent me a note in PagerDuty or perhaps Slack or both. And I kind of understand at this point there's a problem. Now, the security perspective might give me a slightly different view. And that view might be, hey, well, someone has shelled into a container and are doing things like running commands and also touching some sensitive info, right? And that's all been triggered as a policy, and it violates our PCI standard. So I've got a different view using the same tooling, the same set of information, but kind of getting the monitoring perspective, what impact is it having, and the security perspective, what exactly is going on here. So then there's the where did it occur. And one of the cool things here is that I might be looking at the monitoring screen and I see the spike that happened. It's in my big store DB namespace, the container, and then on the security context, I notice that it's the exact same thing, right? And so I know that something's happening here. And now I can take the next step and try and understand, why did it happen? So now I'm exploring things like the audit, the syscall captures, correlating different metrics to try and identify root cause. And you see under there a list of some of the things that you might want to look at that's all then correlated with OpenShift activity. So as Dave said, OpenShift runs, it's basically Kubernetes. We're talking to the Kubernetes API and putting everything in context so you can see exactly where in your deployment the particular issue is happening. And the real goal here is to accelerate kind of troubleshooting and any kind of security operations. And again, so that you're able to move faster and be able to ship applications confidently, understand that you're compliant, manage that cloud security risk, and at the same time meeting your availability SLAs, your performance SLAs. And so it's critical especially to a production OpenShift environment as you extend and grow that environment. I think that brings me to the end. Dave, I'm going to hand it back to you to kind of wrap it up and close it out for us.
Yeah, thanks. This is all excellent, Eric. Thank you so much. And it's such a great story. I think we think bottom line that contributes to moving to the cloud much quicker, for our joint customers, because they have a secure platform and they're managing that security risk and validating the cloud compliance with Sysdig. So if you all want to learn more about Sysdig and Red Hat, please take a look at the resources to the right here, where you can find more information on what we discussed. And we just wanted to thank everyone for joining this session today. We can't wait until we see you all in person. So until then, please stay healthy, everyone.
Eric and Dave, thank you very much for that great presentation. So just in a moment, you're going to see an offer that's going to pop up on your screen. It's a sign up for a free 30-day trial of the Secure DevOps Platform. So click on that button if you want the free trial. And then just for additional information, if you're looking for you have additional questions, or you want more information about the Dev platform, please email sales@sysdig.com for more information. As a reminder, also, a few other items. We have handouts available. They're in the handout section of the web viewer. There are some answers to the Q&A, some questions that popped up during the presentation. There are answers there in Q&A if you want to check those out here over the next 1 to 2 minutes and check it out. And also feel free to send any of those additional questions again to that email address at sales@sysdig.com. Before we finish, I'd like to thank our speakers today and Sysdig for their sponsorship of today's online learning session. And I'd like to remind all of our attendees that the recording of the session will be available in about 24 to 48 hours for your review. And you can also forward that on to your coworkers. This recording will be added to the Dev Network and Developer Week content archive, and you can access that at devnetwork.com. That will include this session as well as additional sessions, previous sessions, for information and additional webinars that you can go and check out at your convenience. So thank you very much, all of you, for participating in today's event, and we'd love to make sure that you have a great day. Bye now.